Hi, good afternoon. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm honored to welcome you to today's Grand Rounds presentation by Dr. Larry Heller and Brad Kammer. Thanks for joining us. FAN's celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and we're honored to have the robust support of dozens of schools, nonprofits, corporations, families, and individuals from across the country. We're committed to our vision of an informed and compassionate community, and we'll achieve that vision by presenting fresh ideas that elevate minds, expand hearts, and make the world a better place. We have hundreds of videos archived on our YouTube channel, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates when new recordings are posted. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Natalie Gella, Director of the Trauma Program at Compass Health Center's Northbrook office. She's a Compass is a longtime valued FAN partner. Dr. Gella will do the introduction of Dr. Heller and Mr. Kammer.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Dr. Heller is the founder of the NeuroAffective Relational Model, NARM, a specialized psychobiological approach to working with developmental trauma. He is also a senior faculty member at the NARM Training Institute. Brad Kammer is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a NARM master therapist, consultant, and faculty trainer. Thank you, Larry and Brad, for joining us today and partnering with FAN and Compass Health Center to provide our Illinois-based clinicians in attendance today with continuing education credits. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Natalie and Compass Health and FAN for having us. We're really excited to be here. We really enjoyed our time last night with all of you that were able to join us. And today we have a lot we're going to cover because we really want to lay out the groundwork of what this neuroaffective relational model is all about. So we're going to give you some of our organizing principles, some of our basic skills that we use, and then we're going to show you one or two video demonstrations of what this work looks like. So welcome, Larry. Nice to see you here.
Nice to see you too, Brad. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to start by sharing our slides. We're going to be talking about the neuroaffective relational model for healing, developmental, and complex trauma. Now, NARM has roots in interpersonal neurobiology and somatic psychology, and so we like to teach in a way that also gives us a direct experience of the concepts that we're presenting. So we have a couple exercises that we're going to be doing throughout the next hour. You're welcome to participate or not participate. It's up to you, of course. No one can tell here on Zoom. And if you do like these exercises, we have a lot of these exercises in our new book, The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma. So we're going to start with the first one here. And we're just going to invite you, if you'd like to join us, to take a few moments to reflect on the ways you experience connection in your life. We're not going to define this for you. We're going to let you define what that means for yourself. So the ways you experience connection in your life with yourself and or with others. And we'll just give you a few moments to notice how this is to reflect on this question.
And we invite you to pay attention to your internal experience while you're doing that, whatever emotions might be there, whatever somatic sensations come up for you.
So this is going to lead us into this theme around connection. We have a few quotes we want to share. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Dr. Stephen Porges, the creator of the polyvagal theory. He said, "What is the primary biological imperative for humans? It is to be connected." And Gabor Mate said, "The essence of trauma is disconnection. So the real question is, how did we get separated and how do we reconnect?" And this leads us to the first book that introduced the neuroaffective relational model about 10 years ago. And Larry, I'll let you talk about this quote here from the first book.
Well, the original title of the book was actually Connection, Our Deepest Desire and Greatest Fear. But then when we passed that by the publishing house, they said, you can't Google that, so we suggested a different title. We ended up with the title Healing Developmental Trauma. And it, of course, from a marketing perspective and letting people know exactly what we're talking about, it's very useful. But this quote, that I developed of connection, our deepest desire and greatest fear, really sums up so much of what we're working with when we're working with trauma, when we're working with what we talk about as the adaptations to trauma, is that we're hardwired, we're born to be connected, but in adapting to developmental complex trauma, one of the primary coping mechanisms that we all as human beings use is disconnection. So connection then only becomes our greatest fear when we've used various mechanisms of disconnection to manage in our life. And so that original title was designed to help people begin to understand what we talk about as the core dilemma, or the core conflict, we sometimes call it as well, in the NARM work, and how to work with that. And that's what, how to work with that and more about it is what Brad and I are hoping to share with you today.
Yeah, we're going to be outlining in a little bit the 5, what we call the adaptive survival styles, which are these patterns of disconnection that Larry was just referencing. So this book came out a little over 10 years ago, and Larry and I have been working hard on creating a book that's more accessible. This book was really presenting the developmental theory. And even though I know, Larry, you got a lot of comments from non-clinicians about this book, we really wanted to make a book that was both going to be very useful for clinicians and people that are just wanting to learn more about how to take some of these principles and concepts and apply them to actually help themselves or the people that they work with. So we've been working on this book, and it just came out this year, which we're really excited about, a few months back, and our audiobook came out last week, The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma. And one of the things we're going to be talking about is how NARM is a model that works with C-PTSD. It doesn't primarily address or work with PTSD, and we're going to do a little differentiation between post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, one of our main intentions, if not our main intention for the book, was to really create greater accessibility for the understanding of complex trauma and for a model that we believe can be very effective for it. And we're part of this larger trauma-informed movement that I know FAN has brought a lot of different people that are part of this trauma-informed movement. And, our institute, our book, our teachings are all geared to really helping bring this understanding into our society, not just in the clinical room between us and our clients, but also how people can take this out into their life. I know, Larry, you talk about the ripple effects a lot. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to just show you one ripple effect, because this is a good example. And Larry mentioned this last night as well, that someone that got trained with us went back and asked her school, the school of where her daughters go to school, if she could share a little bit about what she's been learning about complex trauma and about NARM. So she went and talked to the staff, and they were really open to it. And when she went to drop her children off the first day of the next school year, she walked in, and there was this sign that I'm going to show you right here that was in the front of the building. If my computer stops freezing, it will be appearing in a moment. And this sign basically is about how they started to integrate some of these principles and train their staff in them. And I'm going to read it because it's a little small for some of you probably. It says, "In this school, we are trauma informed. We connect before we correct. We stay curious, not furious. We understand behavior is communication. We believe in co-regulation, that kids regulate off the adults in their lives. We think can't, not won't. We empathize when someone is flipping their lid. We believe in restoration, not punishment. We believe that relationships buffer stress and build resilience. All of us need one another always. Resilience means we see you, we hear you, we are with you." Now, I don't know how many of you, when you walked into elementary school, saw a sign like this, but I can tell you that that was not my experience. So, this is just an exciting thing for us to see these ripple effects in action. Larry, anything you wanted to add here?
Just the point that where the trainings, we've got a significant part of the trainings oriented towards clinicians, but this is a part of the ripple effect, is that we're also, as Brad mentioning, trying to address anybody who's like first responders, in terms of we're addressing pediatricians. I was involved with a study where we were addressing pediatricians and general practitioners to help, because they're often on the front lines of noticing trauma when it's very early. And so we're trying to increase awareness in so many different directions. And of course, our specialty is training clinicians, but we haven't forgotten about the broader outreach as well.
Yeah. So we're going to do this pretty abbreviatedly, but we want to do a little bit of differentiation between complex trauma and how that's different than the trauma that we generally think about, which is often referred to as PTSD, or sometimes we refer to it as shock trauma. So one of the things that we talk about in NARM is we look at environmental failure. And oftentimes in psychology, they're focusing on the attachment failure, the failure that children experience from the consistent, persistent failure that happens between that children experience from their family, from their parents, from their caregivers. But we also want to broaden it and understand that there's also systemic failures that impact children either directly or impact the family system. And one of the things that we look at is that basically anything that disrupts the capacity for developing secure attachment and healthy development for a child will impact what we call self-organization. It's going to have impact on their internal organization, which then later on will start leading to various symptoms and disorders. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. The tree here on the slide is generally what you see with the ACEs study. There's 10 different categories of what's happening in the household that's generally focused on the family system. But there's also, as you can see, at the roots, there's community impact. And of course, there's natural environmental impact. You can see at the bottom there, right above the little child running, it says pandemic, which of course we're kind of moving out of, I suppose. I don't know how to quite define it right now, but we don't know the impact that the pandemic is going to have long-term on child development. So that's just another example. Even parents that did the absolute best they could to create a safe environment, a secure environment when everything shut down, and the disruptions that happen for the children, these are also impacts that do impact our brain, our nervous system, and the development. So we can look at it at this ACEs slide. And again, we need a lot more time to break all of this down. But as you can see here, there's these larger systemic failures that impact our neural development. And so much of what we're doing in NARM that Larry's going to be presenting in a few moments here is mapping out how neurodevelopment gets disrupted. And we have a framework for it. We have a developmental framework that looks at 5 developmental stages of disruption. And again, we call that the adaptive survival styles. And that helps us then to go in with the skills that we use to know how to address the different developmental themes that might have been disrupted in childhood. So one of the ways that we're differentiating between PTSD and C-PTSD, or what we call sometimes shock trauma and complex trauma, is that on the left-hand side, you can see the 3 main categories of PTSD. Now, C-PTSD hasn't been officially recognized yet in the United States, unfortunately, although there's a lot of people trying very hard to make that happen. It has been recognized by the World Health Organization. So most countries around the world now do have a C-PTSD diagnosis. And the 3 categories, if you look at the top here, I want to talk about just really briefly these 3 additional categories. Affect dysregulation, which has to do with the difficulty controlling or managing our internal states, particularly our emotions and our physical experience, our somatic experience. Our negative self-concept, which has to do with self-esteem, low self-worth, shame, what we call in NARM shame-based identifications that Larry will be talking about a little bit. And the last one, of course, interpersonal disturbances. If we've had failures in our most trusted relationships as children, then it creates a blueprint for us moving into adulthood where we really have difficulty staying balanced and creating healthy, intimate relationships. So Larry, I'm going to hand this slide over to this is adaptive survival styles. I don't know why my computer's freezing this morning, but Larry, do you want to start talking, and then it's going to appear in a second here on
Yeah. So as you're seeing on the left-hand side, we've got some of the older language. We don't use any of that language anymore under character structures. But just those of you who've been trained in some other models where they used to use these, we put it in there just for clarification. One of the things that was very important to me as I developed NARM was to depathologize these dynamics. And of course, you can see on the left, they're all, the older, very pathologizing, labels that they used to put on people. Where in the NARM adaptive survival style, we're really talking, the names developed out of a sense of what is the core capacity that gets compromised, or in some cases doesn't develop at all. And so the NARM adaptive survival styles are named for those. And this is a developmental process. So we're talking, in terms of chronological development of the child. So each one of these adaptive survival styles reflects the person having adapted to trauma at different stages of development. So the very earliest forms of developmental trauma, which can be significant attachment trauma, or sometimes very early shock trauma, or birth trauma, or we now know that prenatal trauma is a reality. We've got significant evidence-based medicine and evidence-based studies for that. And so when we don't have other mechanisms, other ways to manage these adverse experiences, at the very beginning, the earliest year of life, let's say, the main mechanism that we have available to us is disconnection. We shut down our bodies, we shut down our emotions, and we withdraw from other people. So we disconnect from our bodies and ourselves, and we disconnect from others. So when we're working with, and these individuals later in life tend to be highly symptomatic with a whole variety of syndromal kinds of dynamics, both psychological and also many physiological challenges. And the other thing that I want to make, the other point that I want to make here is about adaptive survival styles, is that one of the key distinctions that we make in NARM is that it's not the trauma itself that creates difficulties. It's not that the trauma itself is unimportant by any means, but it's the adaptations that we made to that trauma that we carry forward into adulthood in the form of these NARM adaptive survival styles that create the disconnection, the dysregulation, the distortion of identity that we experience. So now going back through these adaptive survival styles, and we see that the second stage of development, which is a little bit later in life, early, in the second year, let's say, is attunement. And again, when the child's basic psychobiological needs are not being met adequately, when there isn't an attuned caregiver or caregivers in their life, that we all as children have to find ways to survive. And one of the very common coping mechanisms is that children learn to be attuned to their caregivers in order to get anything for themselves. And it's just part of the whole process of not having these basic needs for nurturing, nourishment, contact, touch. When these are not met, then the child disconnects from the needs for all that. It's a way of managing the pain of having these basic needs be met. And so often they lose the capacity to attune to their own needs. They get very good at denying their own needs, and even end up taking pride in being able to do with very little and priding themselves on not needing. And the paradox is that the coping mechanism is often to become the need provider for other people, so that if you're not getting your needs met, then you try and meet the other's needs. And that of course creates long-term difficulties, but all of these adaptive survival styles helped us survive. And that's why, that's why the word survival is in there. Without the capacity for disconnection, for example, like including in talking, going back now to the first pillar, talking about disconnection, the primary coping mechanism is dissociation. And generally, that's not even viewed as a coping mechanism, it's viewed as a pathology. But when I teach about dissociation, for example, which can be part of any one of these survival styles, but particularly strong with the connection survival style, I always talk about dissociation is that capacity which helps human beings bear the unbearable. And so we shut down, we go into freeze, we go into, various different kind of fragmentation and various other strategies of disconnection. And in NARM, I tried to help people see the common threads running through these survival styles so that they can understand the organizing principles, because you often, when you've got somebody who's had a lot of early trauma and often ongoing trauma in their family and end up strongly, struggling with these connection survival style dynamics, is that they have so many different symptoms. And it's so easy for therapists and clinicians to get lost in all the various psychological, relational, behavioral, emotional symptoms that they deal with. And in NARM, we've tried to help create again an underlying understanding so that we can focus on what's driving these difficult symptoms, and not just, and our orientation very strongly in NARM is not just to try and get rid of symptoms, but to use them to learn about where it is that we're disconnected. And so that's part of the dynamic. And then as we move further down, we see the trust survival style. Again, this is where children have the experience that they can't really trust the significant others in their lives. They're usually their primary caregivers, but it can be much broader than that, including growing up in dangerous communities that can, where trust just isn't possible. And so these individuals learn not to trust and have this belief that the only person you can ever depend on is yourself. And it then precludes the possibility of any kind of healthy interdependency with other people. And the orientation then is to have power, have control. It becomes a way of compensating for this lack of trust that they experienced because they were truly let down in a whole variety of ways that we go, the details of which we go into in our trainings. Then the fourth developmental stage we call autonomy, which is, again, the missing or compromised capacity. These are some of the symptoms of this particular survival style are those individuals who can't say no, who can't set limits, who really can't speak their mind. You don't know what's going on with them. They're often very sweet. They present this very sweet and friendly and nice, on the surface kind of presentation. But deep down, there's a tremendous amount of anger and this fear that if they really show up as they are, that they won't be loved, that if they say no and set limits with others, they won't be loved. And this then creates, as you can imagine, huge kinds of interpersonal difficulties, as well as just difficulties in terms of their, relationship to themselves. And then the last adaptive survival style in NARM, we talk about it as love sexuality. It's the only survival style with two names in the title, so that we're really talking not only about these two core capacities, the capacity, particularly in intimate relationships, to have an open heart and a vital sexuality, but a third capacity, which is to be able to integrate love and sexuality. Because some people have capacity for one and others capacity for the other, but it takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability, or it requires a tremendous amount of vulnerability to integrate and to be that vulnerable in an intimate relationship with your partner. So that's an overview of these 5 both developmental stages and this adaptive survival style mechanisms that develop in response to, environmental failure at any one or all of those stages. And it always comes up as a question when we start to teach people about these. Most people, these are human issues, obviously. Most people have elements of all of these. But then also most people find that they relate most strongly to one or two. But again, because we're all human beings, these are not just first 6 years of life kinds of dynamics. They're human themes throughout the rest of our lives, because we're all, needing connection, as we talked about at the very beginning. Attunement, being able to attune to ourselves as well as to others, is significant. To be able to trust. If you're not able to trust, you can't let down. You always feel like you have to be in control, and it feels very lonely in that place. And then the capacity for autonomy. Autonomy actually is the precursor, or well, it makes intimacy possible, because if a person or a client doesn't have adequate autonomy, then intimate relationships seem like a trap. And so autonomy is a fundamental, again, psychobiological capacity that is needed in order to be able to enter into an intimate relationship where ideally love and sexuality are available and possible for people.
Yeah, so a lot more detail, obviously, to unpack. The books have much more detail on this framework. We have some YouTube videos, and then, of course, we hope some of you might be interested in doing some training with us as well. So we'd like to kind of bring this into our bodies as much as we can. So we're going to invite you, if you'd like to join us on this exercise, to take a few moments to reflect on a client, or it could be someone in your life, or it could even be about yourself, and reflecting on what did they have to do in order to stay safe in their early environment. What strategies, what adaptations did they have to do to stay safe in their environment? And how have those life-saving adaptations then, how are they brought into adulthood and created obstacles for themselves? And we'll just give you a few moments to reflect on that if you'd like. So we're going to do a very, very brief overview of the NARM clinical model, and then we're going to show you 1 or 2 video examples of how we actually apply these skills in this model to real human beings. So we thought what we would do is we would talk about the 4 pillars of NARM. So I'll put these up here, and Larry, you can go ahead and then kind of set us up for what we'll be looking at in the videos.
Okay, so as you can see, the first pillar we call clarifying the therapeutic contract. Now, it's not a literal contract. It's another word would be the therapeutic understanding, a clarity about what the two of you are actually doing together. And there's 2 parts to that first pillar. The first part has to do with the client setting the intention for the therapeutic process. Now, but we ask that in a very basic way, like, what is it that you're hoping for from our work together? And we have a whole hierarchy of understanding of what are more workable intentions and what are less workable intentions. But just to distinguish this NARM kind of contract from other models, it's not a behavioral contract. It's not contracting around behaviors. It's more, to the degree that it's possible for an individual, it's more contracting around capacities in the client that have not been able to fully develop. Now, of course, some clients that it can't go there at the very beginning. They're coming in, they've been struggling with 5 years of depression or 3 years of anxiety, and we have to settle, do the best we can, in other words, for a different kind of contract that isn't oriented towards developing capacities. But ideally, and over time, when the NARM therapy goes well is that the client's capacity to identify what it is that they're most wanting is able to be articulated. And then very importantly for the NARM approach is that the contract that we then have is always exploration oriented and not results oriented. And this is a real game changer so we've had thousands of therapists now come through our various trainings in Europe and in the US. And the feedback that Brad and I have received, and other NARM teachers as well have received, is how helpful really understanding this therapeutic contract is. So, because traditionally, and I've experienced this thousands of times in all the consultations and supervisions that I've done over the years, is that generally in the psychotherapy world, a client will come in with symptoms and issues and difficulties, and the therapist then takes the responsibility to figure out a treatment plan and figure out what to do and how to do it. And in NARM, it's much more a collaborative process, so that there's an agreement about what we're doing together and an agreement that we're exploring together. Because as we know, as clinicians, we can't promise results, but we can promise exploration. That we'll explore what, for example, we'll explore if it's just anxiety, we'll be glad to explore what this anxiety is about for them. But if it's more, about, a more clearly articulated intention, like I'd like to have more capacity to be in intimate relationships, then we would formulate the contract. Well, I'll be glad to, and we would say, I'll be glad to explore with you what's getting in the way of you having the capacity for intimate relationships that you want. And we went over it very quickly, but that there was a brief quote there from Rumi. And I didn't realize that he was, if you don't know, he was a Sufi poet who lived, I think, in the 12th or 13th century. But he was really pretty much on the same page. And he said something like, don't go looking for love, but look for the internal obstacles that you have to experiencing love. There it is. There it is. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have had against it. And that is so consistent with our understanding of the way we structure the NARM work. So once we have a clear understanding, which is again like building a foundation on a house, then we can move into pillar 2. And pillar 2 has to do with asking exploratory questions. It's an inquiry-driven process. And so we're trying to understand and invite the client to reflect on for themselves, what are the various dynamics that are going into whatever the symptom or symptoms that they're experiencing. And so we ask questions about that. And here's an important piece that again sets NARM apart from other models, is that we don't interpret in NARM. It doesn't mean that we don't reflect on what the, like build what we call threading, like help the client see the thread between this comment and this symptom and what they said. We'll do some of that, but based on the information that the client is giving us. And even when we do that kind of threading or mirroring or reflecting, we are always wanting to make sure that that actually fits at that moment for the client. So we might say, well, let me understand, are you saying, and then we'll put it in the form of a question, and then they can respond yes or no, or they can clarify when we have the what sounds like a more traditional therapeutic intervention of just a certain kind of mirroring process that goes on. Another important element here in pillar 2 is that when I developed the model, I talked about deconstructing experience. So we take, for example, instead of talking in broad generalities about a theme, let's say they're struggling with intimate contact. I'll continue to use that example. So then we would invite them to go back to some kind of situation where they were getting close to somebody, and then let's say they got scared and decided to pull away. We would then have them bring up that specific experience bring it into the present tense, and then we begin the exploration more in the present tense, or at least with one foot in the present tense and one foot, working with whatever the historical theme is that we're dealing with. And this creates a very different kind of atmosphere. NARM is non-regressive, it's non-cathartic. We're not trying, we don't talk about the inner child. We do have an expression, we talk about child consciousness, but we're not trying to get people to relive their early difficulties. We're really holding the possibility that from an increasingly adult and in what we call an embodied adult perspective, they're able to rework and revisit, particularly the distortions of the sense of self and the distortion of relationships with others that always develops out of developmental trauma. And so again, it's a complex process, and I can't give it all of the time that it actually needs. But to give you just a quick overview of the exploration phase of the NARM work that we do. Then you can see the third pillar is talked about reinforcing agency. And you can see beneath that, it says reflecting on one's relationship to organizing internal and external experience. But even more than that, it has to do with ownership of, let's say, emotions that we were just imagining in other people, projection as it's traditionally called. So that agency is not only, it has to do with supporting what it is that we're doing to ourselves, not again to blame ourselves, but to help us see that often we're continuing to respond to the world and to, challenging or, difficult situations through the lens of these 5 adaptive survival styles. And when we do that, we're obviously seeing the world through a child's eyes. Agency is a way of ultimately supporting the inner adult as we see, for example, what we're actually doing in the process. Now, just to give you a very brief example of how agency, works that I think everyone can relate to, because the word agency can be confusing for some people, but let's talk about couples therapy. You've got a couple who comes in to see you, and generally, very commonly at least, their initial foray into the work is they're going to be blaming each other, and often the hidden agenda, or sometimes it's more explicit, is to get you to take sides and see that they're right and their partner's wrong, or they're good and their partners are bad, or this kind of dynamic. So they're into often a kind of a victim place and a blaming place, and that's a reflection of not experiencing agency. And to the degree that they stay stuck in that place, the prognosis for that relationship is not good, because when one person is defensive and attacking, the other person gets defensive and attacking, and all of that is a reflection of not experiencing agency. Now, the converse is also true, as many of you have probably experienced. As soon as one or both begin to allow more vulnerability, when they start to own their part of the 50%, their 50% of the difficulties in that relationship, they immediately start to experience increasing agency. And then the prognosis for that relationship is much better. Now, that dynamic that I've just explained in terms of couples is also true in terms of a person's life, in all of the areas where there are emotional difficulties or relational difficulties. In a non-blaming way, we're helping the client to see what is their part of that dynamic. And there's a whole languaging of agency that we've developed to help support that reinforcing agency element. And again, I just want to emphasize, it's not blaming the client, it's not blaming the victim, it's more helping them see how they've internalized the environmental failure that they've experienced, and then they have carried that forward and acting it out against themselves or against others or both. And it's really, so it's a process of ownership and and really feeling more and more like an adult in an adult world.
Larry, if we're gonna have time for the video, you're gonna have to do this pillar 4 in about a minute or less. So.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for the update. So very quickly, reflecting psychobiological shifts. There's ultimately a body-based element to the NARM work, because the connection-disconnection process, which includes all of the traditional defenses, the connection-disconnection process happens on a bodily level. We disconnect by holding our breath, by tightening our jaw, by tightening our gut, by tightening all of the muscles in our body. And so we're tracking connection and disconnection throughout the process. And pillar 4 is reflecting psychobiological shifts particularly towards increasing capacity for connection, so that when somebody has a useful insight on a cognitive level, then we'll say we want to help the client anchor that experience in the body. So what does it feel like in your body as you have this new awareness about ABC? Or as you're feeling that emotion of very powerful grief, what are you noticing physically? And so often people will say they start to relax, they start to soften, and that's pillar 4, reflecting psychobiological shifts, particularly in the body, and anchoring them in body experience.
Yeah, and the last slide here that just adds on that is that's our model of working with what they call post-traumatic growth in the field, that we're helping clients develop what we call increasing psychobiological capacity. So what we're going to do now is we're going to shift and show you a video of Larry working with the client. And we always appreciate people that allow us to use their sessions for learning. And Dano has been so gracious to do that. If we're only going to show you the first pillar, because we don't have enough time, of course, but if you'd like to see the whole session, or actually read the whole session, it's chapter, I think, 11 in our book, where we have a couple transcripts at the end and this is the session that Larry used for his transcript. So I'm seeing that my computer is freezing here, but let me make sure I can get my, okay, looks like I can get the video up here. Okay, Larry, anything you want to say briefly before we get started here?
So again, the primary focus is on the pillar 1, or the contracting phase. So you'll see I ask him what he wants, and really it takes about 10 or 12 minutes for us to get clarity about what it is even that we're going to be doing together, because you'll see that I don't accept as a contract some of the things that he first comes up with, because they're not coming from him, as you'll see. He'll be clear in a minute. They're coming from friends, from a book he read. They're really what we would call, what he is talking about at the beginning, are strategies. And I want to know, what is it that he hopes that strategy will bring him? That is the way of distilling out what the intention is, and having that clear intention is, I hope you'll begin to see at least, is so useful.
All right. Well, tell me what you'd like for yourself from our session today.
Yeah, so I thought about it prior to the session, and I think 2 things popped up. I figured I'd just kind of actually bring something that's heavy and very personal to me. I noticed that in a lot of these videos, people get very personal and really experience a lot of emotion, and that sometimes is really uncomfortable for me to just, be a 36-year-old male sobbing. So really what I'd like to take probably a look at is, I'm married and in the midst of, I'm separated and probably going to divorce. And some of the advice that's been given to me is, I should just be completely alone for a period of something like 1 year, no romance, no dating at all. And there's a fear that comes up with the thought of that, and that's really what I would like to explore, is like what is that that almost like dread, anxiety, apprehension behind a simple thought of just remaining completely celibate, no dating or anything of that nature for an entire year.
Pause for a second.
Okay,
So
you
you
said there
see-
were 2 things.
So you can see he's actually talking about a strategy. Being celibate is a strategy. You know, you can read books, or he got both a book and recommendations that would be a good thing because he would have been labeled as a love addict, and that'll come up in a little while. But I'm not going to accept that because that's a strategy. I want to know what is it that he's really wanting. And when I put it that way, it's probably obvious for you or the viewers to see that ultimately what he really wants is the capacity for relationship. But and I'm going to continue working with him and clarifying to see if he's able to articulate that for himself, as you'll see in a moment.
Is there another one as well?
Yeah, the first thing was just almost like my apprehension towards like the raw emotion sometimes that people display during these interactions and the uncomfortability. But I think it would almost be more pertinent to explore what I mentioned with the celibacy, no dating thing for a year. And it was kind of more of a preface of like, there was something uncomfortable for me initially moving into the experience of like, oh, if I am to shed tears, that sounds like uncomfortable kind of thing, because there's probably a lot there.
Well,
Larry, we don't have time to, I'm sorry, but we have a hard stop at the hour. So,
okay, very briefly, I'm going to respect that. I'm not going to, if he's told me he doesn't want to sob, I'm not going to override that, just so everybody knows. Okay, go ahead.
Great.
Sorry, I'll keep my
and just to be clear too, is that there's no expectation that you, just because other people may have shed tears, that you're supposed to, or anything like that. If you're feeling emotional and you're struggling with it, that's something we can explore in the course of the session. It's all ultimately your choice whether you choose to express it outwardly or just feel it inwardly. So I just want to be clear that there is no expectation on my part about how you manage that. So then going to the theme that you brought up is, well, I heard a couple of things. So I heard one is that people or somebody recommend that you take this year off from all relationships and sexuality and everything. So, and then I heard you have a kind of fear reaction to thinking about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what would be the optimal outcome of our work today if, at the end of our time, you really got what you wanted? What would that be?
Maybe to explore what is blocking me from following through with an entire year of abstinence, no dating. What's so terrifying about that? And how can I get past it?
Well, there's an assumption in there that you actually want to do that. I heard that this wasn't something that you came up with exactly. It's something that somebody recommended to you, if I understood correctly.
Yeah.
Okay. So, because I wouldn't want to just make that same assumption, myself. But maybe part of it, as we do the exploring, is that you could decide if that is actually something that seems right for you or not. And then if it does seem right for you and there's fear with it, that also could be part of the exploration that we do together.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I would like to explore if that is right for me. And really, if it is right for me, I'd like to see what's blocking me from making that leap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And certainly I guess there would be important material in there, but I wouldn't want to start off assuming that this advice is something you should definitely take. I don't have a position on it one way or the other, except that I wouldn't assume it automatically. It's your life, and it would be your decision if you choose to or not to.
I understand.
Okay. So, did you say more than one person mentioned this to you, or was it just one person?
Yeah, more than one person, and then reading books that would like PM Melody and stuff like that, and like withdrawal period and that kind of thing. Of like, oh, maybe I am a love addict. Like these symptoms I seem to relate to many of them. And maybe the healthiest thing I could do would be to follow through with that advice. of a certain period of abstinence. And I think when it's really considering that, that's when it was like a lot of anxiety came up. Whoa, I don't know if I can do that, which to me only felt like more evidence of like maybe that would be.
Well, that's one possible interpretation. It could be that it's triggering, but there could be other elements in your reaction too, and that's why, since you've seen my videos, I don't like to make assumptions that, without really exploring it together, if that's because the whole concept is frightening to you, or maybe something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would it be easiest to simply explore whether or not a lengthy period of, no dating would be a good decision for me or not?
I think that would be a useful place to start, to see if you're really on board with the recommendations and the book that you read, or books, whatever, and personal recommendations, to see if that's really right for you. It might be a useful first step. Like,
Okay. That sounds good.
okay. So as you've read, as you read Pia Melody and talked to some people, I heard you kind of questioning, well, you said maybe you're addicted to love, or love addict, or something. You said like that, and I'm just curious about this concept and how you relate to it. But maybe we could start there.
Okay, that sounds good. I think the concept is maybe primarily twofold. One is, I think, the uncomfortability that I've described, simply just being single, not dating, not being in a relationship. And that kind of stands out to me a lot. And then secondly, like my wife that I'm separated from, and other women that have dated seem to have, similar patterns of, they get overwhelmed and, kind of distance themselves, and then I kind of draw closer. So just from my own experience and the information I have, it seems that I have a pattern to my romances, and a pattern that I'd like to break free of.
Okay, so that's shifting the direction a little bit, and maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. I don't have a problem with that. I'm just reflecting what I'm seeing is that now I hear you talking about your relationship to relationships, or your relationship to romantic relationships in particular.
Yeah.
And so let's say this, and what I would call, a strategy, the strategy of being celibate and so on for a year. Let's say that were to work exactly as everybody predicted, and that you would hope that, what would you get? What would be the hoped for result of that year's abstinence, so to speak?
Focus
Good
on the
question.
intention.
Potentially a new relationship with myself and how I behave in a relationship, as well as perhaps the type of woman that I'm generally attracted to, which is, as I stated, kind of gets maybe overwhelmed at a point by too much intimacy.
Mm-hmm. So again, if we kind of look at what you're describing right now, and kind of try to see into what is ultimately the intention that you have there. What is it that you're really wanting? If we, take apart all of the scaffolding, what is it that might be left that you're most wanting here?
That's a good question. I think deeper potential healing into some of the I don't know how to say that, like unresolved things from my own life and my own childhood, perhaps, that have shown up in my patterns of romance.
But again, if we go to what might even be deeper than that. See, that's also a strategy. Like if you resolve these things from your childhood, then what? Okay, because really what I'm hearing out, all of these different things is that you just like to have the capacity and ultimately to have a good relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an intention.
Yeah.
What do you experience when I just feed that back to you? I notice something shift in your face, and I'm just curious what you're aware of right now.
Yeah, that was kind of like the aha moment. Like I could actually feel it in my body.
Ah.
And like, oh yeah.
What does it feel like in your body when you get that aha moment?
It felt good in my body. Like I felt a little more relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like,
Let's
yeah,
pause
that
there.
is what I want. I just want to have a good relationship.
Let's pause it, Brad. Let me explain just that. So this is what we see all the time. Brad calls it the kerplunk moment. I think that's what you call it, Brad. But we can see it, and I don't know if you noticed that when and I helped him find it, because rather than just struggle, I passed that by him to see if he would sign on for that intention. And immediately you could see all the muscles in his face relax, his shoulders dropped, slightly. But when we teach people how to track on a bodily level all of these dynamics that are communicating so much important information, because it often, if not always in different ways, is experienced that way, that to be able to finally even articulate what it is that you're most wanting actually starts to put you more in touch with your heart, more in touch with what your heart's desire is. Now, we wouldn't necessarily use that term with a client, often wouldn't use it, but really then when the client is able to articulate what their heart's desire is, then that sets us up to explore, okay, we can explore together what's getting in the way of you having the kind of relationship that you want. Now, interestingly enough, because again, we're running out of time here, is that the strategy of celibacy turned out to be, and this comes up later in the working, you can read in the chapter, was really that in 18 months, he was severely burned, and he was in a burn unit in Barcelona behind glass. He didn't have any physical contact with his parents at all in that period, and he could only see them, I think, for 30 minutes a day. And one of the things that I always invite therapists to do is ask yourself, what would you have to do physically, emotionally, and how would you make sense of it cognitively to adapt to a situation where you're getting no contact, and you've got a severe burn. So you've got a shock trauma, and then you've got relational trauma. And in NARM, we teach people how to work with both elements. So I just wanted to give that kind of overview, summing up. I know we're running close to time here.
Yeah. And just another shout out. We have what we call a Inner Circle program, which is an online program for those of you like me, I love to watch these videos to learn about how to actually take the model and integrate it. We do live and video demonstrations. And then Larry was pausing it to deconstruct it. We do that monthly. We deconstruct the session. So you're welcome to join us in our Inner Circle program, and all 4 levels of our training. We'd love to have some of you learn with us. So thanks, Lonnie.
Brad and Larry, great. Thank you so much. I'm sure people found that extremely interesting. There's a bunch of questions in Q&A. We're not going to be able to get to them. I will let people know. Brad did tell me in chat privately that they can share the slides. So for those of you wondering about that, Brad, maybe I can get those as a link that we can then include in the when we send out the recording. It could be a link to the slides as opposed to a PDF or a PowerPoint. That would be great. So thank you everyone for coming. Compass Health Center, I'll be sending them the attendance report, and they will be then preparing the CEUs and getting them out to everyone. Thanks for coming. Brad, Larry, it's been great spending 2 days with you guys, and best wishes as you now re-emerge out of COVID. So thank you so much. Appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, take care.